Lobbying is the act of attempting to influence decisions made by officials in the government, most often legislators or members of regulatory agencies. Lobbying is done by many different types of people and organized groups, including individuals in the private sector, corporations, fellow legislators or government officials, or advocacy groups. Lobbyists may be among a legislator's constituencies, meaning a voter or block of voters within his or her electoral district, or not. They may engage in lobbying as a business, or not. Professional lobbyists are people whose business is trying to influence legislation on behalf of a group or individual who hires them. Individuals and non-profit organizations can also lobby as an act of volunteering or as a small part of their normal job. Governments often define and regulate organized group lobbying that has become influential. The ethics and morality of lobbying are dual-edged. Lobbying is often spoken of with contempt, when the implication is that people with inordinate socio-economic power are corrupting the law in order to serve their own conflict of interest. But another side of lobbying is making sure that others' interests are duly defended against others' corruption, or even simply making sure that minority interests are fairly defended against mere tyranny of the majority. For example, a medical association may lobby a legislator about increasing the restrictions in smoking prevention laws, and tobacco companies lobby to reduce them, the first regarding smoking as injurious to health and the second arguing it is part of the freedom of choice. Etymology: in a report carried by the BBC, an OED lexicographer has shown that lobbying finds its roots in the gathering of members of Parliament and peers in the hallways of the UK Houses of Parliament before and after parliamentary debates. One now debunked story held that the term originated at the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C., where it was supposedly used by Ulysses S. Grant to describe the political wheelers and dealers who frequented the hotel's lobby to access Grant a euro, who was often there to enjoy a cigar and brandy a euro, and then try to buy the president drinks in an attempt to influence his political decisions. However, the OED cites numerous documented uses of the word well before Grant's administration, including in Pennsylvania. The term lobbying also appeared in print as early as 1820. Other letters from Washington affirm that members of the Senate, when the compromise question was to be taken in the House, were not only lobbying about the representatives' chamber, but also active in endeavoring to intimidate certain weak representatives by insulting threats to dissolve the Union. April 1, 1820. Dictionary definitions: lobbying is a form of advocacy with the intention of influencing decisions made by the government by individuals or more usually by lobby groups. It includes all attempts to influence legislators and officials, whether by other legislators, constituents, or organized groups. A lobbyist is a person who tries to influence legislation on behalf of a special interest or a member of a lobby. Overview: governments often define and regulate organized group lobbying as part of laws to prevent political corruption and by establishing transparency about possible influences by public lobby registers. Lobby groups may concentrate their efforts on the legislatures, where laws are created, but may also use the judicial branch to advance their causes. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, for example, filed suits in state and federal courts in the 1950s to challenge segregation laws. Their efforts resulted in the Supreme Court declaring such laws unconstitutional. They may use a legal device known as amicus curiae, literally friend of the court, briefs to try to influence court cases. Briefs are written documents filed with a court, typically by parties to a lawsuit. Amicus curiae briefs are briefs filed by people or groups who are not parties to a suit. These briefs are entered into the court records, and give additional background on the matter being decided upon. Advocacy groups use these briefs both to share their expertise and to promote their positions. Lobbying by country: Australia. Over the past 20 years, lobbying in Australia has grown from a small industry of a few hundred employees to a multi-billion-dollar per year industry. Lobbying has become a political fact of life and is now endemic in local, state, and federal government. It is not just the local councillors and state and federal politicians being lobbied. What was once the preserve of big multinational companies and at a more local level, property developers, has morphed into an industry that would employ more than 10,000 people and represent every facet of human endeavour. In Australia, lobbyists are expected to organise a pass to obtain access to the federal parliament. The parliamentary pass must be signed by 2 parliamentarians. It is administered by the Department of Parliamentary Services and has the enforcement of the Criminal Code Act 1995. The pass is valid for 2 years. However, this is a pass not absolutely necessary, as some lobbyists are simply signed in on the day of their visit as guests of senators or members. Moreover, there are some advocacy groups in Australia that can lobby without passes. For example, in 1995, following the lobbying done by the affiliated Residential Park Residents Association Incorporated and other interested tenant organisations, the government created new legislation to provide residential park residents with improved protection. The Residential Parks Act of 1996 became the operating tool for the conduct of residents and park owners alike. In 1998, following further lobbying for the legislative review and revision of the 1996 Act, the Residential Parks Act of 1998 became law. When lobbyists visit most federal government departments, they must also sign a register. European Union. The more political influence the European Union gains on a global level and the more policy areas it covers, the more interesting it becomes for lobbyists. With the enlargement of the European Union in 2004, this development has taken a further step, bringing in not only a lot more players and stakeholders but a wide range of different political cultures and traditions, as well. According to Austrian member of the European Parliament Hans-Peter Martin, the value of lobby invitations and offers each individual MEP receives can reach up to $10,000 per week. In 2003 there were around 15,000 lobbyists in Brussels seeking to influence the Euro unregistered trademark S legislation. Some 2,600 special interest groups had a permanent office in Brussels. Their distribution was roughly as follows: European trade federations, consultants, companies, NGOs, national associations, regional representations, international organizations and think tanks. The fragmented nature of the EU's institutional structure provides multiple channels through which organized interests may seek to influence policy-making. Lobbying takes place at the European level itself and within the existing national states. The most important institutional targets are the Commission, the Council, and the European Parliament. The Commission has a monopoly on the initiative in community decision-making. Since it has the power to draft initiatives, it makes it ideally suited as an arena for interest representation. There are 3 main channels of indirect lobbying of the Council. First, lobbying groups routinely lobby the national delegations in Brussels. The second indirect means of lobbying the Council is for interest groups to lobby members of the many Council working groups. The third means of influencing the Council is directly via national governments. As a consequence of the co-decision procedures, the European Parliament attracts attention from lobbyists who target the rapporteur and the chairman of the committee. The rapporteurs are MEPs appointed by committees to prepare the parliamentary Euro unregistered trademark S response to the Commissioner Euro unregistered trademark S proposal and to those measures taken by the Parliament itself. Lobbying in Brussels was born only in the late 1970s. Up to that time, diplomatic lobbying at the highest levels remained the rule. There were few lobbyists involved in the system and except for some business associations, representative offices were rarely used. The event that sparked the explosion of lobbying was the first direct election of the European Parliament in 1979. Up until then, the Parliament consisted of a complex, and companies increasingly felt the need of an expert local presence to find out what was going on in Brussels. The foundation of lobbying was therefore the need to provide information. From that developed the need to influence the process actively and effectively. Your next important step in lobbying development was the Single European Act of 1986, which both created the qualified majority vote for taking decisions in the Council of the European Union and enhanced the role of the Parliament, again making EU legislation more complex and lobbying further more important and attractive for stakeholders. In the wake of the Jack Abramoff Indian lobbying scandal in Washington, D.C. and the massive impact this had on the lobbying scene in the United States, the rules for lobbying in the Euro, which until now consist of only a non-binding code of conduct may also be tightened. France. In France, the political system does not integrate the lobbying practice. Much French Republican thought has been suspicious of the claims of particular interests, which are often contrasted with the general interest of the nation. This is one interpretation of Rousseau's social contract, for example. So while lobbying has always been practiced in France, organized lobbying made a significant appearance in France only in the early 1980s. Since then, it has steadily grown. Many interest groups routinely seek to influence the French institutions as the government and the French Parliament. To make up the lost time, more and more French enterprises try to organize their own lobbies by creating their own public affairs department. In recent years, growing numbers of grassroots and grass-top lobbies have been organized by citizen groups, representing interests such as genetically modified organisms or the defense of civil liberties in the digital realm. But there is currently no regulation at all for lobbying activities in France and, as a consequence, this practice suffers from a lack of transparency. There is no regulated access to the French institutions and no register specific to France, but there is one for the European Union where French lobbyists can register themselves. For example, the internal rule of the National Assembly forbid to members of Parliament to be linked with a particular interest. However, MPs don't unregistered trademark have to declare their interest and the list of MPs assistants is not public. At last, there is no rule at all for consultation of interest groups by the Parliament and the government. Nevertheless, a recent parliamentary initiative has been launched by several MPs so as to establish a register for representatives of interest groups and lobbyists who intend to lobby the MPs. The purpose of this initiative is to introduce standards of conduct and access to the National Assembly. Through the use of a register, these standards of conduct and access will enable the Assembly to identify and maintain a list of the representatives of interest groups who follow legislative activity and to supervise fully the access of those representatives to the National Assembly. This motion has not been adopted yet. Slovenia. In Slovenia, lobbying has been regulated since December 5, 2010, when the statutory provisions of Integrity and Prevention of Corruption Act came into force. IPCA regulates lobbying at both the national and local levels. Commission for the Prevention of Corruption of the Republic of Slovenia is the national focal point for lobbying oversight. Commission conducts investigations into allegations of illegal lobbying and violations of lobbying regulation. Commission also assumes a decision on entry into the register and maintains the mandatory central register of lobbyists. The special feature of IPCA regarding lobbying are provisions that require government or local officials or civil servants to report all lobbying contacts, which are within the Project Transparency published on Commission's website. Lobbying is also one of the 6 mandatory risks which entities, obliged to draw up and implement integrity plan, are supposed to address in integrity plan of their institution. United Kingdom. United States. Lobbying in the United States describes paid activity in which special interests hire professional advocates to argue for specific legislation in decision-making bodies such as the United States Congress. It is a controversial phenomenon, often seen in a negative light by journalists and the American public, and frequently misunderstood. While lobbying is subject to extensive and often complex rules which, if not followed, can lead to penalties including prison, the activity of lobbying has been interpreted by court rulings as free speech and protected by the U.S. Constitution. Since the 1970s, lobbying activity has grown in terms of the numbers of lobbyists and the size of lobbying budgets, and has become the focus of criticism of American governance. Since lobbying rules require extensive disclosure, there is a wealth of data in the public sphere about which entities lobby, how, at whom, and for how much. The current pattern suggests much lobbying is done by corporations, although a wide variety of coalitions representing diverse groups is possible. Lobbying happens at every level of government, including federal, state, county, municipal, and even local governments. In Washington, D.C., lobbying usually targets congresspersons, although there have been efforts to influence executive agency officials as well as U.S. Supreme Court appointments. It has been the subject of academic inquiry in various fields, including economics, law, and public policy. While lobbyists number 12,000 people in Washington, D.C., those with real clout number in the dozens, and a small group of firms handles much of lobbying in terms of expenditures. As an activity, lobbying takes time to learn, requires skill and sensitivity, depends on deft persuasion, and has much in common with generally non-political activities such as management consulting and public relations. A number of published studies showed lobbying expenditures can yield great financial returns. For example, a study of the 50 firms that spent the most on lobbying relative to their assets compared their financial performance against that of the S&P 500 in the stock market concluded that spending on lobbying was a spectacular investment yielding blistering returns comparable to a high-flying hedge fund, even despite the financial downturn of the past few years. A 2011 meta-analysis of previous research findings found a positive correlation between corporate political activity and firm performance. Finally, a 2009 study found that lobbying brought a substantial return on investment, as much as 22,000% in some cases. Other countries where lobbying is regulated in parliamentary bills include Canada, Georgia, Hungary, Israel, Lithuania, Poland, Saudi Arabia. Lobbying is a term often used to describe athletic press that it was biased towards certain football teams. The blue lobby is the name of Al Hilal's press, and the yellow lobby is the name of Al Nasser al-Ittihad's press. See also: activism, advocacy, advocacy group, advocacy evaluation, bribery, client politics, fossil fuels lobby, European women's lobby, issue versus express advocacy, lobby register, money loop, outline of public affairs, pharmaceutical lobby. References. Bibliography: P. L. Petrillo, Form of Government and Lobbying in UE and UK, in, Jews, Clemens, Lobbying in the New Europe. Successful Representation of Interests After the Treaty of Lisbon, 244 pages, ISBN 978-3-527-50597-5, Wiley v. Ch. 2011, Geiger, Andreas, EU Lobbying Handbook, A Guide to Modern Participation in Brussels, 244 pages, ISBN 3-978113316-0-6, Helios Media GmbH, 2006, Glossary, Alphabetical List of Terms Associated with the Lobbying Industry, The Bulletin, March 16, 2006, PA 14, Lobbying Europe. Facts and Fiction, The European Lawyer, December 2005/January 2006, PA 9, The Lobbyists Have Landed, Financial Times, October 3, 2005, PA 8, Brussels Braces for a U.S. Lobbying Invasion, Public Affairs News, November 2004, PA 34, Judgment Call, The European Lawyer, December 2004/January 2005, PA 26, Lifting the Lid on Lobbying, Pierluigi Petrillo, Democracies Under Pressures. Lobbies and Parliaments in a Comparative Public Law, Jafra 2011, Pietro Semeraro, Un delitti di millantato credito e traffico di influenza, ed. Georth, Milano, 2000. Pietro Semeraro, Trading in Influence and Lobbying in the Spanish Criminal Code, 1, Izzarati, Marcin, Legal Regulation of Lobbying in New Member States of the European Union, Arbeitspapier und Materialien, Verschwörungsgelost Europa and der Universität Bremen, No. 74, Lycoplans, Participation of Civil Society in New Modes of Governance. The Case of the New Member States. Part 2, Questions of Accountability. February 2006, Lyko Kretschmer/Hans Jar Paragraph RG Schmiedes, Enhancing Transparency in EU Lobbying? How the European Commission's lack of courage and determination impedes substantial progress, Internationale Politik und Gesellschaft 1/2010, S. 112-122, Lobbying. BBC News:politics. December 22, 2005. Retrieved January 30, 2007. Police loans inquiry is widened. BBC News:politics. March 30, 2006. Retrieved January 30, 2007. External links. United States, lobbyists.info, the largest, comprehensive database of 22,000 registered lobbyists. Contains searchable profiles of lobbyists and government relations professionals, their clients and issues. Top 25 lobbying groups at the Wayback Machine. Fortune listed the top 25 lobbying groups in 1999. Lobby Watch, a project of the Center for Public Integrity with reports on lobbyists and lobbying effort as well as a searchable database. OpenSecrets.org, NoLobby.com, Capitalism magazine mini-site. Opposes lobbying restrictions on free speech grounds. The Citizen's Guide to the U.S. Government, an online tutorial containing information for individuals who wish to address issues with their elected officials. Free Speech National Right to Life page containing documents opposing excessive regulation of lobbying as infringement on right to petition guaranteed by the First Amendment. Public Affairs links, First Street Research Group powered by http, firststreet.press.com, reports and analysis on the lobbying industry, Europe. Public Affairs Jobs Headquarters, News, Jobs for Lobbyists and Policy Professionals, the Lobby Ticker, website of independent Austrian MEP Hans-Peter Martin with original lobbyist invitations and voting recommendations he received, Commission for the Prevention of Corruption of the Republic of Slovenia, Pub Affairs, the Public Affairs Network, Public Affairs World, Lobby Planet website, Alliance for Lobbying Transparency and Ethics Regulation, Corporate Europe Observatory, Euro Brussels, the European Affairs Job Site, EuroXpresswww Euroexpresses, Spinoch, the New EU, European Affairs Jobs Community. Alliance for Lobbying Transparency, UK-based campaign, OECD, Special Session on Lobbying, Enhancing Transparency and Accountability 7 June 8, 2007.